Hello, internet friends, and welcome to Keep the Game Moving. And this time, I'm very excited to have another one of my fellow Quests and Chaos GMs. Right now, are we the only Quests and Chaos GMs?
Yeah, it's just you and me. We're rocking the quarantine.
And I am 1/3 of the Quests and Chaos games. James Arano, who's our guest today, 2/3 of the games. He's running 2 D&D games simultaneously. James, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me, Ezra.
I have had the real privilege of, it's been almost 2 years, I think, since we first started playing Gloomhaven.
Oh no, it's been over 2 years.
Has it been? Oh, you're right. Hey, we lost a year.
Yeah.
So
we lost a year. Yeah, that's true.
It's been like 3 years. Wow. And so on Quest and Chaos, James and I and Tossie and a rotating cast of other folks have been playing Gloomhaven, and then James played some other board games, and you joined Natural One.
Yes.
Which is a campaign with another Quest and Chaos GM, Bo, who will be on this show. And then you just started running things. So what was your introduction to being a GM?
Literally the pandemic.
So you had never run a game before you ran that first episode of, was it Frost Maiden?
Dragon of Ice
Part Peak, yeah.
Yeah, no experience whatsoever. Basically, I've taken everything I've learned as a player and watched online and just was like, go!
Hey, that's a good way to do it, man. You throw yourself in the water, you learn to swim pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And you have only ever run remotely.
Yes.
That's really interesting. So how is that? Like, how? Because for me, I will say that running remotely has some advantages. You can do it during a pandemic. You can play with folks who are not local, which is a really nice thing. But man, I have so much trouble because I rely so much on the energy at the table.
Right.
And sort of that flow with the players that I struggle with that. How has it been for you?
I mean, since it has been only my only experience, it hasn't been horrible. Definitely in that first stage, it was trying to figure that rhythm out, because having played exclusively at the table as a player character, there is that energy that just gets that natural flow that you bounce off of people from. And I've come to rely less and less on the visual and more on the auditory.
Yeah.
Because for me, listening to that is what gives me that energy. And I think definitely as a streaming game, it does force, at least for me and what I see from the players, to listen a lot more, so that we're not stepping over one another. Because especially with Zoom, the way it records audio, if more than 2 people are speaking at a time or at different volumes, it all just cuts out and you can hear no one. Yeah.
It's so interesting. And so then on top of that, you do things I don't even do, because you deal with Roll20, which is a whole nother sort of beast in that regard. Are you using, like, are there pre-made things for Roll20 that you can use for the games you're running? Is that, or are you building all this stuff?
So there are a lot of assets on Roll20 that you do have to purchase. They do have some free content that you can use, and there has been existing content within Quests and Chaos that I can grab and pull from. But I am not satisfied with that more often than not. So I am the masochist who's like, yes, we are having a game today. Oh, we have a game today. I have to build maps. Shit. Or I don't build maps, and then we just role play for the entire 3 hours, and I'm like, yes, this is good.
That is my style. Because you've even, I mean, we're going to talk about sort of deconstructing written material, pre-written modules, but you've created monsters whole cloth for this, and like different things like that, and that's so you have to put those in Roll20 so that they have the stats. One of the reasons
I don't use Roll20 for. I use it strictly for the board.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But everything else I keep on like D&D Beyond or on my own papers in front of me that you don't see the magic that is happening.
Just cheat. I one of the things this, I hope none of my players listen to this, because I have admitted several times that like everything in my world, everything has a dramatically appropriate number of hit points. Like I never have written down this has 107 hit points. It's, they do big damage and I'm like, should that have killed it? Maybe.
Mm-hmm. No, I feel that in a similar fashion where I'm like, this would be poetic if this character got the kill versus that character, and their turn is next.
Right.
I think they'll hang on for a little longer.
They made the death save. So you are currently running Dragon of Icespire Peak and Rime of the Frost Maiden, and these are both campaign paths for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and these are some of those that are designed to take you from like 1st level to like 10th level or something. Is that?
So Dragon of Icespire Peak goes from 1 to 6. It's a intro pack that I think is actually really great if you're ever interested in Dungeons and Dragons. It's, I think, it was $15 at Target.
Wow.
Like I grabbed a physical copy because when we first started, my internet kept going down. So I was like, I can't rely on this. I will use, obviously with Zoom, you still need internet, but I couldn't rely on like D&D Beyond to be able to pull stuff from. So I grabbed the physical copy. It was $15 and it's a really quick, or it can be quick, can be long, 1 to 6. Where Rime of the Frost, and Rime of the Frost Man is 1 to 15.
Okay. So that, it's interesting because you're like they've been about the same amount of time, even though the 1 to 6 one. But now, so you and I both, I did this with Mass Scenario. I do this compulsively where I use a printed module as sort of a framework that I can then sort of bounce around and add my own ideas and go wherever the players want to go. And I know you've done some similar stuff with kind of deconstructing what's in there. So like how do you decide when to sort of add some extra stuff?
So I guess starting with Dragon of Icespire Peak, because it's a beginner module, I think they wrote it to be very open. And it seems very episodic in that way, where it's like, you go to this place and you do the quest. It's very procedural, like a law procedural, where it's like the quest of the day. You go to the logging camp and there's onkegs that attack. You go to the gnome town and there's a mimic that attacks. You go to this place and you find the legendary item that kills the dragon. And in that, I find interesting because it gives first-time DMs a lot of flexibility, where it's like, oh, you could literally just go like one quest, or you could link them together. For me, with this campaign, I found that, well, one, I asked my players to send me backstories. And when they start sending you 2-3 page backstories, you're like, oh, this is some good stuff. By the way, can we swear on this or no?
Go to town.
Okay. I'm like, I will be very professional and speak.
Nobody watches this thing.
Well, like, it's a bunch of shit. So, and it's a lot of good shit. So how do I start bringing that in, especially in a module that is meant to be its own standalone thing? And when it comes to adding stuff, I like to ask why a lot. So to use it as an example, I mentioned the gnome town where the mimic is one of the attack, or like the main like antagonists, if you will. And in this gnome town, gnomes have gone missing. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. But also reading through this module, it's like, how the heck did a mimic get into this gnome town when gnomes are known to make inventions and traps and have escape routes and all of these things that protect their settlements? And I'm like, what if one of them let it in? And then it's okay. Well, why did they let them in? And for me, I didn't really have a good reason for it until I looked at one of my players' backstories, which is like, yes. And actually, several of my players, they all mentioned the War of the Silver Marches, where orcs came down from the spine of the world to attack the Sword Coast area. I'm like, oh, what if that was one of the reasons? But how is that the reason? Why is that the reason? And we go, like, I just kept asking why, until we get to a nice little kernel of truth where I decided that one of the gnomes brought in this mimic because they are trying to cover up their, how should I say this? Illegal
Spoilers?
smuggling business.
There we go.
Which is for them to get money to do research onto things on like the War of the Silver Marches. Of course, that never gets like that doesn't get interacted with players at all.
Right.
But like asking those why questions, just like keep taking it down, it just starts to flesh out more and more and more. And then it's like, oh, I want to make this a murder mystery. Well, we need different culprits as opposed to the main person. And then we start pulling more and more and more. And then eventually it becomes a whole thing.
It's actually one of the reasons that I love running pre-written modules, because I don't need to be worried about the big story. It's there, and I know where the finish line is. Whereas when I'm doing my own thing, sometimes I don't know where the finish line is. And that, and so at the end of the day, everything is going to point towards the finish line. Yeah. But I can say, oh, there's a little space here to go off and do this kind of thing. While they're in Shanghai, this would be fun, or that sort of thing. Or and so you can really use the written thing as sort of a North Star to always be like, and that's where we're going. When we're done with this, we're still going to be going to that. I'm a big fan of it. I think it makes things easier for me, and it sort of, it gives the players that overarching purpose.
Yeah, and again, just like to keep referencing, well, both Dragon of Icespire Peak and Rime of the Frost Maiden, there's the big bad. You got Cryovane, the White Dragon, and then Oriole, the Frost Maiden. Those are your goals. How do you get to them eventually? But everything else in between is just you fill it out.
How much, if any, how much have the players taken you off on side tracks and things?
I don't think locationally they have. I do present different areas to which they can go to, and they can tend to do that. I think it's once they're at the location, they start to do weird things. They're like, I want to go to the kitchen. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I want to run away from the party and steal a sword. Oh, okay, cool. And I'm totally okay with that. However, if they're like, yes, I want to go from this town to this town, I haven't prepped. That's where it gets dangerous for me, especially with Rime of the Frost Maiden. Because you start off in 10 towns, and each of those 10 towns has a very distinct personality, distinct architecture, distinct people. And on a stream campaign where I'm thinking, yes, I have to go, I have to create a story that is entertaining. If I don't know the place, that's when trouble happens for me.
Right. Yeah, it is the one. I think one of the challenges with that improvisational thing is you can paint yourself into a corner. I am definitely guilty of offhandedly like, oh, I'm gonna make this side adventure. It'll be really fun, and I'll have it refer to the main plot, and then I will totally forget something that apparently I dropped in this side adventure that is super important. And a player will be like, wait, wasn't that the crab guy from? And I'm like, oh right, yes, it was. And so when you do that inspiration, that improvisation as a GM, take some notes. Right.
Yeah. That's something that I still struggle with. I'm like riding the ride with my players. I'm like, oh yeah, you know, we're going this way and we're going that way and this way and that way. And I come out of it like ending the episode. I'm like, shit, what was that character's name that I made up?
Yeah.
Because I just made them important.
So it's interesting because you've only ever run games on stream.
Yes.
And I am kind of fascinated with the different, it's a different style of GMing, I think, on stream, because you're I'm going to say different, and I don't mean that pejoratively. I think there's a lot of similarities, but when I'm running on stream, I'm like 30% game show host and 70% dungeon master, and it's a weird kind of push and pull. And you have, especially as we've been playing in the pandemic, and we have access to the Twitch chat. You have kind of a peanut gallery that for me, it's sort of hard not to pay attention to and to kind of play to almost.
Right. For me, I don't keep that open.
That is very good.
Yeah, I also did this as a player. I don't like looking at that because then, as you said, sometimes it can dictate my choices where I'm like, I understand that some folks have their opinions about certain characters and the way the story should move. Hopefully no one else listens. I honestly don't give a shit.
No, 100%. It's I have set, so I was at a con once playing with a GM that many people who watch this will know. And this GM, it was a very emotional game. And this GM would spend a lot of time telling me what I thought. And so finally I said, it says player Ezra on this sheet. And that is, but on the stream, it's not the GM so much as it is kind of, it's everybody's kind of playing to the audience. And you notice it, like I really notice it with puns. People are like, ha ha ha, and sort of things their character wouldn't say. And that always happens at a table, but I think there's a playing to the audience part of it that, can be challenging.
Yeah. And to that, there was a very, very interesting moment for me when we had to pre-record an episode of Rime of the Frost Maiden. And then that episode, it was mainly combat. But honestly, I think it was the most in tune episodes that the players and myself were a part of.
Yeah.
Because they're not worried about that at all. And I'm not worried about it. But when I get that energy back, I'm like, yeah, let's go.
It's true. You notice it as a GM at the table. It's one of the reasons when I run with Quests and Chaos before the world ended, we were in studio, and I would only get like a little text thing on a monitor that said like, here are the bits, that sort of thing, and it was a lot easier to deal with.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I always think about when I'm thinking about running on stream is what I'm going to do if a character dies, because these are, now it's a little different because I run Cthulhu, and so they're kind of rental cars in a sense, like everybody's just waiting. Just treat it like, and so everybody has a backup character ready to go, but there's also the sense of like, oh, everybody really likes this character, and so I definitely find myself giving plot armor at times. Have you run into anything like that, or?
There has been, well, the infamous were-rat situation,
right?
Dragon of Ice Fire Peak. That was intentional. They were all going to get knocked out. But there have been times on both campaigns where a character gets close. And if I were to actually think as the antagonist NPC they're fighting, they would end it right then and there. as opposed to, switching focus.
Right.
And I mean, it's up for debate where it's like, oh, I've downed one, make sure it's down so that it never gets up, or it's like, it's down for now, I will handle the rest. That's two different fight modes,
Right.
that are legitimate. But I have found myself at times being like, let's go to another player so that way they don't feel as ganged up on.
It's funny. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, a system that I love dearly, which is super vicious. Some monsters, mostly animals, actually have a trait that if they knock something down, they will just sit there and eat it. I think it's called feast or something. So anything that they knock down, like by rule, they will ignore everything else and just start eating.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. Also, like traditional D&D is very much that hero fantasy, the epic fantasy, where it's like
fantasy.
Yeah, where it's like you stand up again. The hero stands once more, and yeah, that's all fine and dandy. But I mean, for me personally, I still think of, like, to reference the Biggie Critical Role, when one of the characters, Mollymock, died. It was very effective that he died, and it's shifted a lot of the characters' perspectives. And for me as a storyteller, I'm very interested in that. I'm not a vindictive GM who's just like, yes, die. But for me, it's like, what can the characters learn from that death? Where did they go from there? And I'm infinitely more interested in that.
So what I'm interested in, and this, if I were to ever run D&D for more than a one shot, one of the aspects of the game would be the idea that death doesn't matter. Because in the D&D world, resurrect. Oh, you died, raise dead, And so, like, what does that do to a society when, death kind of doesn't matter?
Yeah.
And especially for the players, like, it's hard to make death a kind of a, and I mean, anybody who runs a big campaign has like a TPK plan in their head where, like, if
rocks falling from the ceiling, I don't know.
Well, no, what I mean is a plan for if there's a TPK. Because I've got 8 books of this thing, and so we're not ending it now, and your cousins aren't going to come after you. So, like, if you get TPK'd, everybody gets captured or something like that, Or I played one where when we all died, we found out we were divine beings and we were resurrected.
Oh shit!
Which gave my character a real god complex.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah. But that kind of, that would be an interesting story to me, of like, because in a Quest and Chaos game, Ruckus died, one of the characters, and 2 episodes later he was back.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the structure of D&D and high fantasy and that sort of thing. But I think that's a really interesting kind of metaphysical question of, would death have the same emotional impact if that, like, we just need to find a diamond and get him to a church,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one part of it. Like, at lower levels, death has much more stakes.
Yeah.
Which I find is going to be fun with Dragon of Ice Spire Peak, because we're nearing the end and they don't have a diamond.
Yes. So are you oh god, how do I want to phrase this? So are you a oh man, now I can't, I had something, but it went away. But, like, I with that sort of D&D kind of fighting and that sort of thing, like, when you are setting up the fights, are you leveling the players up kind of organically or narratively? Like do they level leveling what I think they call it like achievement based or experience based.
Yeah, I do milestone. I don't like
Milestone.
having to do all that experience math in my head or leaving the players to do that. When I say you level up, you level up.
Yeah.
And it's very based on the experience. It's like you went through an ordeal, you negotiated some big treaty, you survived the party,
Right.
you survived a hangover, you leveled up. To me, that it just works much more smoothly, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Oh God, when I would play back in the day, when I played D&D in high school, like we kept track of experience. And so it'd be like, I have 7 goblins and a half of a hobgoblin. And you'd be like, right, the goblins are 7 XP, the hobgoblin is 14, and so you're sitting there like doing, it was a nightmare. I actually think milestone leveling makes much more sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, when I was playing 3.5, very, very first time, like when I was 10 or something, my brother bought like the little pack at, I think it was Barnes and Noble, and he's like, let's play. And it's like, we don't have a GM. Hey, Dad. And
that's outstanding. Your dad was your GM?
And he was horrible. Absolutely horrible, but he at least tried.
Yeah, that's outstanding.
And it was like, hey, Dad, I'm going to go to the door. And he's like, okay, I'm going to open the door. He's like, okay, you open the door. It's not locked or anything? No. Is it supposed to be locked? I didn't read that.
But that's outstanding.
Yeah, and then back then it's like, you killed 2 orcs. Okay, how much experience is that? It's like 35. Okay, I got 70 experience.
I only need 1,220 more.
Exactly. And I think like that's another thing. I think experience really makes it much more of a combat focused game.
Yep.
Because they don't give numbers to a charisma check or negotiating or, nice good old shopping episode.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that's actually one of my principal problems with D&D is that it's a tactical combat system with, some role playing attached. And the role playing part of it is, for me, far more interesting than the tactical combat, and so figuring out how to incentivize that and how to reward that is I think one of the challenges for GMs. So one of the things that you have that I have come to enjoy about you is that you have a knack for creating vivid non-player characters. Now you are an actor, and that certainly helps. You've done improvisation, so that certainly helps. And you've got a great knack for voices, that helps. But, I want to go back to that thing you said at the very beginning where you were asking that question, why? And, going on into that. And I think that's really one of the reasons that your NPCs pop, is that they're all tied back into this narrative and sort of grounded in that. And so, like, what's your process in creating an NPC?
Yeah. So, are we talking about those that are provided, let's say in the module, or the ones that I'm just making up off the spot?
Let's start with the provided ones.
Okay, provided ones. I mean, I guess technically the process is similar. I think it's a little easier with provided ones because they give you some information about them. And as you mentioned, I am an actor, and I keep asking myself the question, why? And it's like, why do they do this? Why are they here? Why? And it comes down to like a basic triangle of acting where it's like your given circumstances, your character's objective, and their actions. It's like given circumstances are all the things that happen before you ever meet the character. So it's like, what is their history? What is this thing? What is that? But also like, not just like their occupation or on that. It's like how they are as a human being. How does that interact with their environment? So let's say for Drow society, very easy one to pick apart. It is a very gender binary society where it's matriarchal and the males are subservient. So it's like, okay, NPC character, if it's male, how does that interact? If it's female, how does that interact? Or if they're non-binary, which takes on to more of that traditional elf tradition of like Coralon and all of that,
Right.
how does that butt up against the gender norms of that society? So it's all of that in one part of the triangle, and that informs a lot of stuff, particularly their objective. What do they want? And every being wants something. It could be as simple as I want food, I need to take a shit, I need some water, to like I want you to buy my goods, to I want world domination. What do they want? And that's all informed by their given circumstances. So let's say a male consort, I want to supersede the matriarchy. That's a big objective. The question is, how do they get there? And that comes to the third point of the triangle, their actions. How do they go about that? Do they conspire? Do they use brute force? How do they go about going to their objective? And for me, it's sort of become instinctual to like very quickly just like think on those terms. It's like, yes, funny voices, descriptions, they flesh out the physical being of the character. But what makes them memorable, at least in my opinion, is that they, as you said, feel grounded. They move through the world wanting something. And again, it can be as simple as a shopkeep to being like, I want you to buy my wares. Well, how do they go about making you buy their wares? Are they conniving? Are they charismatic? Do they appeal to your sympathy by being like, it's been 10 years since someone bought my cookies, please?
Hope you've made some new cookies.
They're still crunchy.
Limbus cookies.
But yeah,
I love it's funny because so I was a theater major. I'm not an actor. I'm an amateur at best, not even a craftsman. But bringing the we called it the vote sheet back in the day. That was like a character thing. But that triangle of the given circumstance, the objective, and the action, and just constantly going back and forth between those. What are they doing? How do they want it? How are they getting it? That is a great shorthand to making good NPCs, and to making NPCs that aren't just Diablo guy with the exclamation point over his head. Because everybody, as you said, everybody in whatever world you're in wants something, and so playing that is important, and knowing that they want this, and they're going to try and get that from the characters somehow. It makes your NPCs three-dimensional almost immediately.
Yeah, and that's another thing. As a GM, the amount of time you have with any of your characters is like this. It's super short. So you have to make bold choices. You have to make them immediately likable or detestable. Like, make your pick, and then you can, if like the characters revisit them, then you can start fleshing them out.
Yeah,
but
and
like,
the characters will tell you, the players will tell you which NPCs are going to come back. You can get the sense of like, oh, okay, they really like that guy, or they really hate that guy. He's going to keep popping up.
Yeah, and even like one-off characters that are just there for advancing the plot, or I'm going to drop off my horse here. Yeah, you don't need to give them a lot. It's just like, hey, I want to talk to someone and make their day great. Cool. That's okay. Sorry, that's another thing. I find often a lot of people like to make their NPCs antagonistic to the player characters. And that is tiring. To always be on the opposite end versus like, let's get some people to support you. So that way, when you have those people that are up against, I'm not saying like if they don't feel like they can share like with their player characters, but it's like they have someone they can go to, and it's not always like players versus DM. It's like, oh yeah, DM at times it's like, hey guys, I'm your friendly innkeeper. I'm gonna give you a free room because I like you. Versus like, you shitbags, you coming in again? 10 gold.
Last time you were here, you drank all my liquor.
All my liquor.
I think that's a great point. I think it's funny that more often than not, players are more suspicious of friendly NPCs than they are, because they're like, this guy I know how to handle. He hates me. I get that. Why does this guy like me? That worries me, and so they automatically become suspicious of that.
I mean, and I think that's just like the ingrained nature of it, where it's like, all NPCs are out to kill me. They're just like, that farmer boy is gonna stab me with a pitchfork. That son of a bitch. I'm gonna kill him now before he gets a chance. And that's when you get murder hobo campaigns, and you're like, nope, I will not. I hate that. I hate that so much. Sorry, we're derailing. We're going off places.
I've always said one of the reasons that I run a game in the recognizable world, I run usually Call of Cthulhu in the 1920s, is that there's a moral framework that people understand. So you don't just go and shoot somebody. Whereas in D&D, there are entire races that exist only to be shot. And
yeah, that's problematic. We can talk about that. That's like a whole hour conversation of
yes, it is.
Racism right there.
Yeah. And so, for some reason, not for some reason, very quickly players are like, there's no police in this world. And the town guards, don't mean anything. This world is lawless. We can just kill this person and take their stuff and it's fine. And, and so I'm always looking for ways to bring the repercussions of players' actions back to them.
Mm-hmm.
Partly it's because I hate players. That's really, I have a theory in my head that the players are actually the monsters in any scenario. That's my, which is not, not a good story GM way to approach things. But it's, so you said like, your NPCs are grounded in things, but you also have a knack for voice work. And so, that's another way. You don't have to, that's another way you can make your NPCs pop very quickly, is just by doing a real quick, silly accent for them, or just giving them something about their voice, changing your voice somehow.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Is especially with advent of Critical Role, people see Matt Mercer and he's like, hey everybody, I got a weird voice. And was it someone, I don't know if it was you or someone made the comparison. Critical Role is this like regular Dungeons and Dragons, and Critical Role is the same way. It's like sex and porn. It's like they're so desperate from what they actually are like.
Yeah, I can see that.
But like, because like Critical Role, these are professional voice actors. They're professional actors, improvers that know right off the bat, they've been friends for years, like what the rhythm, the riff is. You come to a table at your local game store, it's probably not going to be Matt Mercer who's going to be like, and so we begin your tale. It's going to be like, all right, so hey everybody, good to meet you, and we're going to be starting off at a tavern today. But that's not to say that people who don't have as flexible a register or have 12 accents in their back pocket can't make a character pop or sing based on their voice.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, it can be, it could be as simple as this character has a phrase that they use repeatedly, or even a word, something that just the players will recognize, and sometimes doing a bad voice is better. Like you have learned, as I now have learned, the tragedy of making a beloved NPC. So you have people love the mimic that you did.
Yep.
And you have to make that voice.
Yep.
I had the bad luck of creating a beloved NPC that had a voice that like shreds my throat. The Duchess. Oh, well. And so I had to, do that. And it became canonical that she was on every boat they went on. And so I was always like, crap, what is the Duchess adventure this time? And, that can become its own challenge. But you can just do little changes to make your NPCs come alive. You don't have to bust out a whole accent or anything like that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. People often attribute accents to being how one is shown in the world. No, it's the way one speaks. And the way people speak is completely different. Like right now, I'm definitely in more of a talk show / James presenting form. But if you talk to me in real life, I tend to be a little higher pitched and, hey, everybody, how's it going? And that's a different person than this person right now. And that's only a small modulation. Also, people speak in different ways of speed. Like if someone speaks in a much slower fashion, they will sound a lot more different and a lot more of a different character than someone who speaks really fast. And it's like, hey, how's it going, everybody? How about vocal register hasn't changed.
Yeah.
But the way one speaks, the vocabulary one chooses, that informs a lot more to me about who they are as a character.
If you really want to freak your players out, give them an NPC who only speaks in the third person. Like, that is always weird when they're like, well, here's what Jim thinks. Who's Jim? Well, Jim's right here.
Yes. Clive Augustus Voladath II is here to help.
Always add numbers to names if you can.
The more numbers you add, the more important they are.
That's right.
The family is. That's how.
And they'll be sure to let you know about it.
Yeah. I am the 7th in my line.
But that's you can use, this is all basic acting stuff, but you can use your physical stature and your voice to indicate status, and you can indicate if you know that an NPC is a shifty liar, you can just sort of start looking around a lot. Don't look at the person, just kind of, and you can use these small tricks. Now, one thing I learned the hard way is don't become so in love with your acting that you decide it supplants for D&D insight checks or psychology or whatever you're going to do, because you may think that you are conveying to the players that this guy is someone they should not trust, but the player might not be picking up on that. And if they've got a great insight check, but the character is really good at this, but the player isn't, you want to make sure that the character's ability is what's shining through.
And that's the tricky part, especially with role playing and like charisma roles. That's tricky, especially if, let's say, you are not the charismatic type or intelligent type or wisdom type, the more mental stats. If your players want to be an intelligent person, but they themselves may not be intelligent.
That is me, actually. I always play a wizard, and I'm like, I have no plan. I don't want a puzzle. Let me roll some dice.
Exactly. But then you roll like a 27. Yeah, you're gonna solve it. Of course you are. But don't let their role playing necessarily dictate how successful their character can be.
I'll do a lot of situational bonuses. So like, if you're trying to seduce someone and you come up and you're just like, hey, how's it going? You're going to get a little minus to your roll, but you can still make the roll and you might still be slick enough to make it work. I think that you can kind of blend the two a little.
Yeah.
Taking the role playing that the player wants to do and having it impact the role that the character is going to make.
Yes. I mean, that's I do set sometimes in my notes like bars that they should meet, like DC 15, but like that's flexible based
Right.
on some of their choices.
Right. So if you haven't, I don't know if it's on, I hope it's on your website, but take a second to go see James did a video where he counted down all the voices that he had created for this thing, and it was, what was the ridiculous final number?
It was 50 at episode 12.
Yeah. Now it's only 40, weirdly. We don't know why. That's like 10 of them went
away. There's 40 episodes, 28 more episodes. What? How many possible voices can actually fit in 28 more episodes?
I really enjoy the way that you know, I think the voice stuff is the initial thing that makes your NPCs pop, but it's really that going back to that triangle is what makes your NPCs memorable, because they're not just a funny name, they want something, and they are going around, they're going about a way of getting it. And I think that's super important.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, I guess, to go to like characters that you have to make up on the spot. They are never existing in space solely to be there for the players. Like, they're doing something.
Yeah.
And to speak on this a little bit, there was a part in Rime of the Frostmane where our players entered a tavern, and I had created a map just in case if there was like a tavern brawl, just in case. And they chose a table with on my map just like two characters, one that looked like a male presenting and the other looked female presenting. I'm like, okay, you walk up to the table, and the players were like, hey, can we sit here? And immediately the voice that came out was Tom Holland. They're like, oh, hey, yeah, no, yeah, you can totally sit here. Yeah. And one of the players asks us like, are you uncomfortable? And being an improver, like, you take that. And It's like, yes, the character is uncomfortable. And to go back to the big question, why? Is it because the person that's talking to them? Is it because they're half drow? I don't want to play that game right now. So what if it's the person that's sitting at the table with them? Who's the person sitting at the table with them? Oh, well, it happens to be Mark's girlfriend, Chantel, and they are having a bit of a tiff. Having a bit of a tiff. And that happened. And now Mark is roaming the icy wastes of Icewind Dales because the players inspired him to go be a badass to impress Chantel, because Chantel wasn't having any more of Mark.
It's not going to end well for that poor guy.
He's still alive, at least right now. But yeah, it's, again, they don't exist in space to like, hey, can we sit here? Yeah, you can sit here.
Right. And I think that's, that goes back to the intentionality of NPCs. And I mean, that's true, I think, for any kind of game you're running. Whatever the tone you're trying to set, high fantasy, low fantasy, modern, sci-fi, whatever, the more that your NPCs are three-dimensional, and the more that even your background NPCs have one, just one thing that makes them pop, it makes your game that much better, and connects the players that much more to them. So what have you had kind of just, you have been a bum rush into being a GM. So what are things now that you've run a lot of games in a short amount of time? Yeah. And so what are some things you see kind of the journey from episode 1 to now you're on episode 20 something of
Rime of the Frostmane, episode 40 of Dragon of Icespire Peak.
Yeah. And so what are some things, like, when you look at that journey from like episode 1 to episode 40, what are some things you've learned about being a GM?
A lot of letting go. I remember my first page or I mean, my first episode that I wrote for Dragon and Spire Peak, I think it was like 3 pages of information, which, you know, starting off the adventure, I felt was appropriate. It's like, here are the people you're gonna meet. Here are some different people in the town, history, all of that stuff. And once Rime of the Frostmaiden got added on, and then, you know, life started to pick up once more, I don't have time for that.
Yep.
So it is, for me, like, you're going to this place. What are some descriptors? And always considering more than just sight. I think a lot of descriptions rely on sight and then secondary sound. How do we get smell in there? How do we get taste? How do we get touch?
That's a big thing in horror games, actually. In horror games, you want to engage players' senses in different ways, because, you know, different senses evoke different things in different people. And so, you know, weird smells can really have an impact on the way a player kind of interacts with a scene and that sort of thing.
And like, to that, like, you can use that to create a very warm atmosphere. You can use that to create a very mysterious atmosphere.
Right. You can set a tone of hospitality. You can set a tone of inhospitality very easily.
Oh yeah, like the smell of fresh baked bread. I hope everyone has smelled that at least once in their life. That immediately gets you into a mood of like, oh, this is a good place. This is nice and warm.
That's what healing potions smell like in my D&D world.
I get that fresh baked bread. Oh,
now I want to make powder healing potions that you have to like snort.
All right, just like tap that out on the line and just like.
Oh man, what if healing potions were addictive? Like, yeah, now I kind of I'm actually about to start running I'm running some fantasy stuff. That would be a neat idea if because I ran a Cthulhu game where they found this whiskey that was being made from awful water, and it turned out that like the first 3 or 4 times you drank it, it was awesome. And then like after that, it started to change you and started to have a negative impact on you. But, you know, the players were just like, this stuff is great. It's healing my damage. This is fantastic. Hey, why is my arm scaling up?
Yeah. No, ooh, that's good. That's good. I like that.
You know, your gnomes can make addictive healing potions. They can. That would be a gnome thing to do. They're like, we need to sell more. Well, if we make them addictive, they'll keep buying them.
Oh, I know. Let's put in some cocaine. Yeah. I mean, I think the big one is letting go. Because like, not okay. So like that first episode, I felt justified in making those 3 pages. I think because of that, the Matt Mercer effect, I wanted to make everything super fleshed out. I want everything to have backstory. And like, you see a rock on the wall. That rock was put in there by the granddaddy of the gnome. It's like, he's doing that professionally. 2, I ain't got time for that shit.
And he's got writers.
Yeah, he's got time. And he's got people who can help him work through that. I don't. So it's a lot of letting go. And there have been many moments where I was like, yes, this would be a good moment for this character. And the character goes in an opposite, total different direction. And I'm like, well, hey, what you doing?
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah,
and then sticking and writing with that.
Yeah. Follow the players is never a bad GMing rule. You know, just go where they want to go. And
And I've been fortunate enough to have players who are very giving, and I think that is one quality of a GM that I don't know if is sorely underappreciated. Good players, man, like the ones that not only make choices and move things along, but are willing to step back when it's not their turn.
Yeah.
And that for me is like, oh, sweet. Awesome. I know you're going to be chill here waiting for like 30 minutes as I run this character through an emotional moment. and you're not going to be in like stepping in and be like, oh, hey, how's it going, Mark? Oh, looks like you're crying. What a little bitch. It's like, no, no one want that.
Yeah, camera time can be, like if you're running a con game with randos that you've never met before, camera time is a real thing where you have to have like a clock in your head and being like, that person has done a lot. I need to get this person engaged. How do you connect them? And I mean, that's true at any table, but to your point, like groups that have been playing together for a while, like, okay, this person kind of wants to be a background support character and maybe doesn't want as much of the spotlight. This character, like if their backstory is not involved, they're going to like start reciting it chapter and verse. So throw them a bone now and then. Your players, and that's a real advantage of playing with the same people over time.
Yes, for sure. What else have I learned? Yeah, notes have gotten a lot simpler. It's like here, I mean, again, actor person, it's like very simple notes. It's like, this is Halia, this is what she wants, this is how she's gonna get it. Or it's like, oh, they've met Halia before, what is Halia doing right now? Because I know my characters, I know my players are gonna like, oh, I want to go check in on Halia, what's she doing? Right. And I'll be like, okay, at least I know they're gonna do that. Do they need to meet new people? Then you flesh it out. But I don't do like 3 pages
and
anymore.
Like if my players go like, let's go see what Halia is doing, I'll ask them, what's Halia doing? What is Halia doing 3 months after this? After all this, how is whatever happened impacted her? And that's and A, it means I don't have to do it, and B, it connects the players even more to the world. It sort of brings them into it. But I think that's a great point. Like the sort of having a few notes about where things are and what has happened is really useful, I think.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about how D&D is really a tactical combat system. And, one of the things that I'm always impressed by, like, I don't really have to deal with this. You, as a D&D GM, you have to like set up spells for all these things and, have all, so like how much prep time goes into setting up combat?
I think almost equal time as prepping the world around. So, I mean, that varies. But it's like, oh yes, they're going to be fighting, let's say something simple, 4 wolves. Okay, that's not too hard, but I still have to make a map. If I want more dynamic combat, like what happened recently in Dragon of Icespire Peak when they were fighting the dragon in Era Thimble. For me, a lot of my downtime of just like in life of like walking around is thinking about that stuff. And then sitting down and just being like, okay, 2 hours. But true, I am taking 2 hours to write, but it is an unmeasurable amount of hours prior to that where I'm just like walking down the street and be like, that's a cool idea. And then like just marinating on that for a while. And
I run Cthulhu every Saturday, and then my wife and I go for a walk after the game, and I'm just like, almost just sort of asking questions and like trying to figure out the answer of like, so what's going to happen next time? What about this? And she's my little focus group of one. But yeah, I agree. Like, spending some time like letting ideas just pop into your head, and then not setting anything in stone. Yeah. Just having those ideas and be like, okay, let's sit on that for a little bit and see what happens. But then so much of it is just what happens at the table.
Entirely. And I would say combat less so, because I think for the presentation of a streamed game, I need to at least be somewhat prepared for that.
Yeah.
I think at a home game where it's like, yes, and you go into combat, you could like throw down a mad draw on the marker and just like boom, bam. the unfortunate part of stream is like there has to be some form of presentation to it. So I can't just slap down a gray thing and be like, here is your fighting area. Fight. It's like,
I don't even do that.
I mean, like that's one thing. I do enjoy theater of the mind, but I think I have trouble illustrating it out for my characters because or for my players, because the moment we get into combat, as you mentioned, it becomes tactical RPG,
right?
Where it's like, am I 50 feet or am I 60 feet away? Because
right.
if I'm 60 feet away, then my spell won't hit. So am I 50 feet away or not? And it's like, you are?
Yeah. I agree. I think it would be like, it's really hard to do D&D as theater of the mind now, I think, in its current iteration, because of that. Yeah. What's a system that you haven't run that you really want to run?
That's basically all of them, Ezra, because I've only run Dungeons and Dragons. No, I did see this on the sheet you were running down. I was like, oh, what would I want to run? And I think for me, it's a little less about system and more about theme. I'm a sucker for a good mystery. And I think that would be a lot of fun to do. And I'm also a sucker for steampunk. So while I was doing some research last night about what could do both, Blades in the Dark from 2020
Blades
sounds
in
like
the Dark is outstanding. It's such a great game.
That's good to know because it sounds interesting based on the little blurb I read. Yeah,
it's a great, like, and it's a light GM lift, but a heavy role playing game, and it's an apocalypse engine game, so it's 2d6, and it's essentially like if you roll, you're trying to roll more than 7, and if you get more than 7, you succeed, and if you get more than, the more you succeed, there's layers of like yes but, yes and, or just yes, and similarly no but, no and just no, for failure. And so that's I love the world of Blades in the Dark, and the idea. It's a really cool idea. So the idea in that game is that you're all the players are members of a thieves guild or a gang of some sort, and so it's a heist game, and it's got that. I really enjoy. I think it's on the shelf back there.
Might stop on by to take a look at it.
I'm happy to let you borrow it. All right. Well, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you so much. We end every episode with the same question. It's the Space Jam question. Martians are invading the Earth, and they will destroy our planet unless you run an awesome 4-hour game for them. So, James Arano, what are you running?
Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, the world is destroyed. That's it.
Yeah, they're like, this is boring.
Well, I mean, you're still learning the ropes, but so what would be awesome about that game? What would grab them?
Ooh, what would grab them? What would grab them would be an emotional story filled and layered characters and funny voices.
Yeah, there you go. It would be that damn mimic again. That mimic. So you don't realize this, but that mimic is going to have to show up in every game. Like now, whenever I run, people are like, "Is the Duchess going to be there?" I'm like, oh, come on, that's
sweet Jesus, God damn it! No, I do have plans for Mimi for Rime of the Frost Maiden.
I imagine. Sometimes you gotta give the people what they want.
Exactly.
So it's on there, but you can check out jamesarano.com. You can see one of his new projects, and I don't know where this is going to be available. You can actually say this, but you just co-wrote and directed a short a film in the Avatar: The Last Airbender world, right?
Yes, not co-wrote, but co-directed. It is called Dragon of the West: Iroh's Origins. We're still in production right now, but the episode 1 trailer, which I did not direct, I didn't have any part of, but for White Lotus Films, the episode 1 trailer just dropped on their Instagram, and they will be putting that up soon.
It's been one of the challenges of running a weekly game is that, once you're a working actor, it's hard, the time starts to go away, and so it becomes that's why my prep for every game is 3 bullet points of just like, here are the 3 things I want to have happen. They'll figure out how we get there, but I don't run D&D. That's a whole thing. So if folks take that triangle, that NPC triangle, away from this conversation, because I think that's something that any GM in any game can use to make your NPCs better. James, thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Ezra. Thank you for having me, listeners.
Listener, I think singular. I think it's
listener. Well, thank you very much.
It's a very intimate experience. And like I said, look for James on Quests and Chaos. He is there. Let me see if I can get this right, because Mondays and Saturdays, barring his schedule, running D&D. And you can find all of his stuff on YouTube at Quests and Chaos YouTube channel. And it's really fun. I'm shocked that this is the first, literally the first time you've GM'd, because I really like the way you run a table. And B, I really like the way you run a table. I think you have a real natural affinity for being a GM, and I'm excited to see what when you start making your own stuff, what that's going to be like. I think it's going to be really cool.
Thank you very much, Ezra. That is very high compliments, so thank you.
You deserve it. So friends, that is Keep the Game Moving with James Aaron O. We will see you next time, and until then, keep the game moving.